Modernism Trail of Katowice. In today's episode, we will talk about residential houses on PCK Street. Guides will guide us along the Modernism Trail of Katowice. Ms. Barbara Zygmanska and Mr. Piotr Fuglewicz, the authors of Walking Guide of Katowice. Mr. Piotr, what can we see walking down PCK Street? Mr. Piotr said, PCK was a block of Maria Curie Skłodowska after 1922. Let's say after 1925, because it took a few more years to calm down. The city began to develop from today's Andrzej Square towards the south. Until now, there was a promenade towards the south, that is Kościuszko Street, which ended at the height of Kieleczko Street. Then there were only paths to the park and so on. There was also a lot of free space, because on the south side, a political center was being built. And at the same time, there was an industrial center, because in the vicinity of the building of the Silesian Parliament, which we visited earlier, there were representative offices, most of the big, very rich mining and metal companies. There was a need for very high-class, elegant apartments for a multitude of very well-paid officials and industrialists. This idea has begun to materialize. You could say, along the parallel to Kościuszko Street, which was the promenade of Maria Skłodowska Street, which was almost entirely built up of modernist buildings, just the beginning from side of Andrzej Square, it was a couple of townhouses at the beginning. Of the 20th century, however, everything up there was already modernist houses, except for a very large residential unit, such a contemporary super unit that is on the right side of Curie Skłodowska Street when we go up, which is on the west street. Smaller houses were built along the eastern street. It's private now. And these were the houses actually being built from the best materials, by the best architects, for the best customers, lecturer said. And Mrs. Barbara, can you give me a closer look, as I mentioned earlier, right now a convenience for residents about the modernist style itself? Miss Barbara said, those houses on the left that are now the eastern side, Maria Skłodowska Curie Street, these are the houses that were created in the late 1930s, after 1935. There are several houses that belong to the modernistic architecture. It is particularly distinguished by its appearance. This one house that we're going to talk about now, this is the so-called Wiantlikowski house. Dr. Wiantlikowski was a well-known gynecologist in Katowice. His wife also worked as a gynecologist. They could afford to build such luxurious tenement houses. This tenement house was built in 1938 to 1939. That is, before the war itself. The architect who designed this tenement house was Stanislaw Gruszka. It stands out, such a strong characteristic of modernity. Horizontal balcony lanes that have light color in contrast to the background, which is the dark brown. From the side of Skłodowska Curie Street, such a vertical red element and small semicircular balconies. Yeah, this building is like that, an icon of modern Katowice on all postcards. We can see him in all the pictures. The tenement house was really luxurious. To this day, it is in possession of descendants of this family, and need to say that the family cares about her very much. The tenement house is well maintained. There's a beautiful staircase inside. The apartments are also very beautiful and large. This is a building that's located on the corner of Maria Skłodowska Curie and PCK. We can take another look at the other side of PCK Street. A little higher, there are tenement houses whose architect is unknown. All we know is that it was created for Dr. Henrik Jess, and this tenement house, in turn, is characterized by such very visible semicircular winter gardens. So the porch, the glazed porch where they were kept, primarily plants, where there was just such a place for planting plants. These were very illuminated places. No other tenement house in Katowice had such a large glazed area, as just this tenement house on the corner of PCK and Maria Skłodowska. Lecturer said, Residential house at 6 PCK Street is a luxurious tenement house full of spacious apartments. Some had an area of more than 200 square meters. For the residents, there were also winter gardens, unique staircases, glazed loggias or terrace on the roof. Miss Barbara said, "Moving on now, down PCK Street, and here we have another gem. It is a building at PCK 6, designed by a very well-known architect, Karel Scheier. It was one of the first implementations. The building above all impresses with its proportions. It has such a distinctive modern undercut, so the entrance is kind of hidden in the bottom. At the top, it is covered with a small visor. A beautiful staircase inside too, and at the top, a terrace surrounded by railings, and above all, great proportions. What was just characteristic of Karel Scheier, these buildings weren't so decorative, you could say. They were just delighted with their proportions. Mr. Piot said, "If I may, they were very good materials. That buildings over there has a rosewood door, which have not been destroyed for the last 90 years. If you go and see that door, they look like this, how they were put into service 90 years ago. Of course, they were properly maintained. The materials were of the highest possible quality. The staircase is also very nice in this building at PCK 6. Also preserved practically without any changes," lecturer said. "So the functionality really worked until today." Mr. Piot said, "Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look across the street because there's something which is not on the modernism trail, which is an example of late modernism, because it is not an example of social realism. This is a 60s building. Architects Bushko and Franta, those who made Tishon Tletsya. This is the building that thanks technologies that came after the war. A curtain wall, which means a wall that's not embedded. These are not windows embedded in a wall, just a wall that hangs like the curtain is made of glass. This building is a clinic right now. Before that, it was a health home for construction workers. It can be said it is a very successful example and the continuation of modernistic traditions, because it is, in a functional sense, a building again in the spirit of modernism and functionalism. In the architectural sense, however, is already a step further, because in the modernist buildings were glazed gardens. The second such example is on Potgeronjig Street, near the cathedral. These winter gardens are very nice, but here we have almost the entire wall made of glass, in this building at PCK 1. Lecturer said, "And why was the glass so important in modern times?" Mr. Piot said, "The ideological manifestos of modernity were as follows, that you have to give people light and air. Now, if we wanted to give people access to light and air, this is the role of this light, which also does not always have the norm in modernist buildings, were such that these striped windows didn't give so much light. However, the ones we're talking about, especially the ones with Curie Skłodowska at PCK, are examples of just that, as people imagine comfort and elegance in those times. It has been comfortable and elegant to this day, in my opinion," Miss Barbara said. Still referring to this glass, it was in the Wałęczykowski tenement house, which I mentioned at the beginning. That is the one that has the address PCK 10. There is something that the windows are rolled of cylindrical glass, and these windows have survived to this day. I'm afraid not, Mr. Piot said. Well, because they don't make them like that at the moment, they're custom made. Miss Barbara said, "Yeah, they'd have to be new. One of the first floor broke, and it's already replaced by ordinary glass. But it's not the same thing. Ground floor, if we get close, we're going to take a look down at the window. We see that there is a rolled glass, and in this glass, it has a semicircular shape." Lecturer said, "That's it for today. Thank you very much. Thank you to my listeners and to my guests, Miss Barbara and Mr. Piot. And in the next episode, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look really high. We will talk about the Silesian skyscraper. Why are Katowice called Polish Chicago and the Garrison Church? Goodbye and thank you." This project is funded by government budget The podcasts have been read by Braden Buddy.